Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Welsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it. A very special episode of Newsflash for you. I'll tell you why at the end of the show, so you're going to stick around for that. But in the meantime, we're talking today about, you guessed it, Afghanistan. Joe Biden making a big speech on Afghanistan, helping the country come to terms with the fact that, I think somebody, they get it. A lot of American people get it, but some others don't. We'll get into who those people are on today's show. We'll also take a look at some of the challenges the Taliban have in getting the Afghan people back up on their feet after a pretty crazy and hectic and chaotic last few months and last 20 years in the country. The country is desperately poor, a lot of inflation. The question is, how is the U.S. going to manage such things? Also, meanwhile, voters in California in a swing district, New York Times talked to them. We'll take a look at what they had to say about Biden's culpability in Afghan withdrawal. And not so much of a good news story here, folks, but, not too much of a surprise either. Prop 22, the labor law in California stopping gig workers from forming unions and getting benefits and things like that, has not been good for workers thus far. We'll tell you why for our last story. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it today. And we are starting, of course, with a little bit of talk about Afghanistan. Definitely the biggest story right now. Obviously, the war is over, the troops are coming home, all that stuff. Big deal. Very exciting. We talked about that all last night. Here's a little bit of the take of what the Taliban have been up to since this morning. There's video of them out pretty much like, tourists almost in their own country. You can hear them in the background here. Everyone's watching them. They're all in these white robes and just walking and taking pictures of the planes, being like, "Ooh, look at this! The Americans left us a really nice C-117 right here, or C-17." And this is a Taliban spokesperson. He says the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, on behalf of its people, wants to have diplomatic relations with the whole world, which can also include the United States. In future, we want to make better our relations with the United States through diplomatic needs. Being, in a word, diplomatic there. It's good to see. Something that, time will only tell. But right now, I don't know how long Hamid Karzai, of course, was the original president of the U.S. regime for Afghanistan, horrifically corrupt. But they named the Kabul airport after him. I wonder how long that will stick around. But yeah, I think are they really posing in in U.S. military gear? I don't know, but we don't know. It's definitely it's a victory. Afghans. He was very, very for the Taliban. Zabihullah Mujahid. He's the spokesperson congratulating Afghans on the victory. He made the declaration as he led journalists through a facility littered with the remains of the frantic operation to evacuate tens of thousands of Afghans fleeing the new reality of life under the rule of the militant group. But celebrations by the Taliban are likely to be short-lived. The group now faces a daunting challenge of governing a desperately poor and polarized country plagued by food and cash shortages, terrorist threats, and intensifying humanitarian crisis. And of course, people are going to be a lot less willing to help the United States government than they would be willing to help the Taliban government than it would be the United States government. And it's going to be really, really tough. A third of all Afghans faced with UN called crisis levels of food insecurity. Mujahid, the spokesperson flanked by Taliban officials and fighters from the group's elite unit, said at the airport, still named after the president whom the United States installed years earlier, said they would reopen for air traffic within a matter of days. He also repeated the Taliban's previous assurances that Afghans with passports and visas would be allowed to leave the country, regardless of their role during the American occupation. At the end of the occupation, our biggest goal, the end of the occupation was our biggest goal, and we have been fighting for this day for the last 20 years to end the war and attack of foreigners on us and bring our own Islamic government. That goal is achieved now. So what's going to be really interesting to see is, of course, what strategy the Taliban takes and how the U.S. will react to that strategy. And I think it's going to be very interesting because, I'm already starting to see, a few possible scenarios, Taliban trying to reach out effectively towards the United States, and it's kind of spun, as the Taliban are really trying to make advances. It's scary. The United States security state needs to stop them. Biden needs to punish them, put sanctions on them. And I think it's going to be really, really important here for people, the same people who push Biden to get out of Afghanistan so successfully. What they're going to be really need to do is if the Taliban is actually trying to do what they say, which again is a massive, massive if. Then I think it's really going to be important on people, to Biden's left in his own party to really push him to make sure that this does not become another Iran or another Venezuela situation where you take a bad government and make it arguably more popular by starving the people, blocking things like food and medicine, like we've done for Iran and Venezuela numerous times, which, as we know, is just not a successful way of going about it. It just isn't. He added the Taliban would work to strengthen the government, protect our beliefs, and serve our nation. So, very much spokesperson talk. Despite Mujahideen's assertions, the passenger terminal was in an evident state of disorder. Shattered glass littered hallways and destroyed vehicles were jamming the parking lot. Tens of thousands of Afghans who had clung to the hope of fleeing a country under Taliban rule now faced the reality that the primary escape hatch, Kabul's airport, was under the group's control. So, it's really kind of a tough thing about which Afghans you want to take out, which because people will say again, if you put the definition broad enough, you could have millions of people that were associated with the United States that should be taken out and aren't. So there are going to be a lot of people. Some people could have been evacuated, wanted to stay. Some people could have been evacuated, wanted to get out, but just couldn't. But it's all, really it's a wait-and-see game right now. The places have been ordered. The United States have left. They don't seem to really be going back in. I mean, if they do, I would not be surprised if we see some, undercover, low media attention stories about, we started droning them again. But at least for now, it seems that really we are out of Afghanistan. Qatar and Turkey were said to be in discussions with the Taliban about how and whether they will help operate civilian flights from the airport. The Taliban said on Tuesday the airport would be reopened within days and those with visas would be allowed to leave. So on the northern side of the airport, from where the U.S. military had airlifted some 123,000 people out of the country, even more signs of disarray were visible. Dozens of military vehicles and armored SUVs were left behind. Alongside of them were piles of wrappers from military food rations and empty plastic bottles of baby milk, of all things. Interesting. In front of an adjacent hangar sat a number of aircraft that had, until recently, been used to help keep the Taliban from power. And A-29 Super Tucano propeller bombers, MD-530 gunship helicopters, and Mi-17 transport helicopters. U.S. military officials said that the aircraft left behind were all permanently disabled. So we'll see how that goes. But it looks like, it looks like they're not going to be getting any too many great United States weapons, but definitely the United States would, not like to leave all their precious hardware. But I'm sure, being this is, of course, the United States military, and their budget is permanently raised 24/7 all the time, my guess is they will have no trouble getting any more. Or getting more resources. So Afghans, they woke up Tuesday morning to the reality of an Afghanistan firmly under the control of the Taliban amid intensifying fears their country was being subsumed by a repressive regime as it battles an economic and humanitarian crisis. Again, a lot of that was created by consequences of the United States occupation, the fact that we've been there for so long, and the question is, what is going to be our duty to help? How do we help? Is a lot of people are going to say, we're going to help them by putting sanctions on Afghanistan to get the repressive Taliban government out of power. But, as we would really, again, we cannot let this become is some sort of all too stereotypical situation where, you can see the rhetoric because it's happened before. It's happened time and time again, and it's been proven that sanctions are just not an effective economic strategy. As the last hulking American planes receded from view over the capital in Kabul late Monday, and the news of the departure became clear, jubilant Taliban fighters shot their guns up in the air, the arc of tracer rounds lighting up the night sky. the American withdrawal marked the end of a 20-year occupation. So, and it really kind of been a pretty crazy situation. Saad Mohseni, the owner of Tolo News, Afghanistan's largest news broadcaster, underlined the huge hurdles facing the Taliban, including winning support from everyday Afghans. People's expectations have grown dramatically over the past 20 years of freedom and liberation, and the pain is yet to come. Will the Taliban engage the world with a more inclusive approach, or will they return to the ways of the past? That's going to be a very, very important thing to watch. And really, if they do go back, how many Afghans are going to really care, and how much, because, the question is, will they put up with, a repressive Islamic State if their government is, maybe a little less corrupt, a little bit more functioning, but women don't have the same rights that they do? One thing I'm not buying is the fact that, every single Afghan is trembling under their bed at night about the Taliban, the fact that the Taliban are going to be leading. Maybe, people in Kabul, people in maybe more of the cities, but something tells me if they were able to advance through the country in a week, not everyone is completely afraid of them, because they're not the best fighting force in the world. They just aren't, there's certain realities that have to be put there, but it's going to be interesting to see that kind of propaganda paradox, the media may be getting themselves into about, the true level of support of the Taliban. So a lot of questions here, a lot of very interesting things to watch with how it's playing on the ground in Afghanistan. But let's take it right back to the political perspective. And, of course, we're talking about swing districts, voters, focus groups, what they think. That's next.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our segment to tell you all about what's going on here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network this summer. We do, as I'm sure you know, have a great lineup available for you. We, of course, start with our flagship show, Newsflash, all new Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Uncultured, irregularly back every Saturday with live music and sports analysis with my co-host of the summer, Bennett Laxton. Hidden History will be brand new every Thursday on a bit of a hiatus, but will return shortly. It's the summer of podcasting. It's the summer of sounds. All you got to do is just keep listening wherever you get your podcasts, always here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.
All right, let's get on to some new news, some news that just came out to me today. Want to get the sense, want to react to preferably the video of Joe Biden to actually get the full sense of, his mental state. So let's get a little bit of a clip. This is Biden defending his decision. Have not seen this before, have not read the headlines, but we'll go through, we'll react, and then we'll give you the Times interpretation, because, I think it's going to be probably pretty different from mine, and a little bit, a little bit interesting, to say the least.
Last night in Kabul, the United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history.
Thank you, Joe.
We completed one of the biggest airlifts in history, with more than 120,000 people evacuated to safety. The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats and intelligence professionals. 20 service members were wounded in the service of this mission. 13 heroes gave their lives. I was just at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer. We owe them and their families a debt of gratitude we can never repay, but we should never, ever, ever forget. Let me be clear. Leaving August the 31st is not due to an arbitrary deadline. It was designed to save American lives. The previous administration's agreement said that if we stuck to the May 1st deadline that they had signed on to leave by, the Taliban wouldn't attack any American forces. But if we stayed, all bets were off. So we were left with a simple decision. Either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war.
Yup.
That was the choice, the real choice, between leaving or escalating. I was not going to extend this forever war. My fellow Americans, the war in Afghanistan is now over.
So, I mean, again, cannot say this enough. Huge credit to Joe Biden for coming out there and saying that. And the question is really we're going to be watching two things. Of course, how they handled refugees, actually three things: how they handled refugees, how Biden handles the Taliban government economically, in terms of sanctions, diplomatically, all that kind of stuff, in terms of, public negotiations, and the stuff they're going to do drone strike-wise, which is, and we don't even know if they're going to do it, but it's certainly worth watching, especially now with what we've seen in the, just yesterday we were talking about a whole family being wiped out. We've seen it happen in Syria. Barack Obama was the person who learned this message first and better than anybody. Trump kind of passed it on, was that, drone strike warfare is way, way more equivalent to, way more effective and just easier in terms of serving the goals of the military-industrial complex and the deep state and, keeping things going, because it's just low-grade war for America. It's not going to be low-grade war for the Afghan families that are getting blown up and all that stuff, but it will be a low-grade war for America. And that's an incredibly important point. And that's what this war was, and why it was so popular. But I think the drone striking stuff, in addition to all the stuff about how will they slap them with sanctions? Will they find another way around it? And also that obviously a lot of that depends on the behavior of the Taliban. But as well, that situation going on militarily is going to be very, very interesting to watch. What weapons of war will the Biden administration, if any, in the future use against the Afghan government? Because it wouldn't be surprising to see them just turn right back and start droning civilians in Afghanistan again, like they have been in other places, and Biden's enabled. But yeah, it's an only time will tell moment. So, speaking from the this is a pretty really kind of already we're biting from the New York Times. President Biden on Tuesday hailed what he called the, again, in quotes, extraordinary success. Try and hide it next time, New York Times, please. Of the evacuation of Kabul. By the way, this is something 100,000 people were evacuated in the middle of a airport in enemy territory over the course of, I think it was 2-3 weeks. It's really 2-week rescue of 125,000 people, and 13 service members obviously killed during that situation. And another key point Biden bringing up there: if we had tried to, as Trump laughably suggested, go and get our equipment from Afghanistan, bring all those helicopters back, ship them back somehow, even though they've been permanently, disabled by the United States military before they left. They would really have to commit hundreds and hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground in Afghanistan to actually come through and have a shot at invading again, because that is what it's going to take, and nobody wants to talk about that because no one wants to actually put the effort into really shutting it down. They just want to keep it going. This is the key. The key is enough war so that the war machine is happy, keeps humming on, and as little, keyword here, American death as possible to keep the bad press from getting too bad. Biden appeared intent on forcefully rejecting criticism, the end of the 20-year war in Afghanistan, offering defensive recounting of his decision-making and blaming for... New York Times here, you're being defensive. Let's talk about that. I think you may be in the wrong here, Joe. Coming at it from all angles. Offering a defensive recounting of his decision-making and blaming former President Donald J. Trump for negotiating a bad deal with the Taliban that boxed Biden and his team in. That was the real choice between leaving and escalating. Biden declared, his tone angry and defensive. It didn't seem very defensive. And I think he was 100% right, because that was the real choice. And the key thing is here, he he did blame Trump, but he made a point that I think was a lot more important, which was you just don't have the resources to fully push back. Like, you just do not have the resources to fully take back Afghanistan for, the military, to get every last, Afghan ally out, as long as you want. You don't have to. Otherwise, you're going to have to do a full war and commit hundreds of thousands of troops. You can't do that. It's just not realistic. It's insane to even think that we would do that again. So the president delivered his remarks almost 20 years after the United States ousted the Taliban from power in the wake of the September 11th attacks, and just a day after the last American troops and diplomats departed the country, which is once again under Taliban rule. Biden pointedly did not announce the news on Monday. The final transport plane carrying American forces had left Afghanistan, leaving that instead to Pentagon officials who briefed reporters after the plane had left the Afghan airspace. So yeah, again, the beatings do not stop here. From like, look at this framing here, brutal. Like, just think about the way this is. Like, if you're the average reader, the average American reading this in their head, like, how are they going to take it? Think about like that kind of way. So he said Biden's speech comes as White House officials are hoping to wind down a difficult episode for his presidency. Ending a hugely unpopular war and getting a huge amount of Americans, Afghan allies out in the middle of an occupied city, an occupied country. Yeah, he did that, and I think that's all things. Obviously, it could have gone perfectly. It could have gone better, and obviously, we would still have 13 service members with us. That would obviously be the best option here. But in terms of the array of options that were much more in the realm of possibility, given the circumstances and the real super, super hard sacrifices those troops had to make, standing in crowds of people, assessing them, trying to get in the airport, and with that suicide bomber coming in, it's just absolutely, unimaginable, like, what that must have been like. And we've seen some of the troops did not respond well to the suicide attack and just pretty much opened fire into the crowd, and that really contributed to the enormously high death toll of Afghan civilians, which is not good. But again, the framing here just really quite something. So the ongoing Delta variant, wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, Biden's also focusing on that, according to them, in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida's destructive path through the Gulf Coast. I do think COVID is going to really become a big issue again soon. It's going to take center stage. And then, of course, we got the infrastructure battles set up as well. All right. Now we're going to talk about the California story. All right, so let's take a look at this profile here. This is by Jennifer Medina in the New York Times, taking a look at this family in a swing district in California, in Hacienda Heights. So Brenda and Leo Ortiz hardly had paid enough attention to the news from Afghanistan that it was hardly a surprise when their 11-year-old son asked them a question. How could so many Americans be killed last week? And that was, probably a pretty startling thing for a kid to say, Americans are dying abroad, soldiers were in a war, that's 11-year-olds starting to understand that stuff. So Ortiz, she tried her best to explain, giving their son a brief history lesson on Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, and ISIS. But by Saturday, Ortiz was focused on more personally pressing matters, just how life works sometimes. Her 3 children were completing their first month of in-person schooling since the start of the pandemic. She was saddened by the deaths of the Americans, but she wondered aloud how she could possibly focus on a crisis on the other side of the world when there was more than enough to worry about in the United States in her own backyard. Because, a lot of, for people who, like us, people, if you listen to the show, you probably follow politics pretty closely and are really involved in that media bubble. And I think what you have to understand is, especially if you're listening to this kind of from a more upper class position, is that especially if you're in the middle, like working class, working poor, barely middle class, whatever you want to call it, borrowing the phrase from Nina Turner there, but you are definitely not spending time going through Twitter, looking at MSNBC, reading Atlantic columns about how Biden's, pullout and the pullout from Afghanistan is like an embarrassment to Western values. Like, that stuff is so far removed from your day-to-day life and trying to get your kids through, like, in-person schooling. And even if you are a little bit more wealthy, like, most people, especially if you have kids, are not doing that. Like, they got so many other stuff to worry about. It's very, very, very clear, and especially for someone who follows the news. Like Ortiz, she said, yeah, she and her husband, they follow the news. Like, it's clear. But even sure, she's like, come on. I don't think it was ever going to be easy to leave, Ortiz said. Fair point. She's more ahead on this than most people in the media who thought, we just walk right out of there. We lost the war, but yeah, we could just walk right out of there like nothing's ever going to happen. But she's watching her children play soccer in the recently resumed league at a park in L.A. County in Hacienda Heights. At the end of the day, our country is where we need to be focusing. It's probably a point a lot of Americans almost never, ever, 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 ever vote on foreign policy. It's like it's getting kids to school, healing our communities. It's not our war to fight anymore, says Ortiz. In a time of deep partisan division at Southern California congressional district, where Democrats narrowly outnumber Republicans, voters interviewed over the weekend were largely united on at least one issue. After a 2-decade war, President Biden was right to pull troops out of Afghanistan. So really clear and hilarious. Like honestly, I think we're seeing a real cultural moment. It's not like a huge, society is suddenly anti-war, but pro-peace now and all that stuff. But it's not like, the media still couldn't convince them to another war. But what I still think is going on is the things have gotten to a point, to a boiling point at home, where just any sort of talk or fear about what happens with our troops abroad, it's just not registering with Americans anymore. There's so many other things going on, and another big thing is the touch of 9/11 much further away, and when we got COVID, we got all these crises going on, hurricanes especially in the South. It's really hard to get pissed at Joe Biden for Afghanistan unless you're a partisan Republican or something like that. The bombing in Kabul airport has done little to change their minds. The killing of 13 soldiers, leaving them more numbed than saddened. Again, this is literally in a world, we're asking people to 13 soldiers, but I'm guessing there's a good percentage of the country, percentage of people in this country who have had 13 friends or more, pass away from COVID-19 in the past year and a half or two, or have had something happen, or to them, maybe personally, have had something really life-changing happen in the past 2 years. They lost a job, get evicted. A lot of that's happening right now. You're going to ask people to care about facing eviction. Millions of people, by the way, all across the country, 6 million people at the very least facing eviction today. And there's no one out there distributing their ready money. And the idea they're going to care about the Afghanistan because people like Richard Engel are on TV crying about it. That's just so hilariously unreal. It's good to see that this stuff is just not registering. And someone who follows politics, has the privileges of being able to just sit around and follow politics all day. That is a real relief and something you've got to keep reminding yourself, I think. Amid a still raging pandemic and a still recovering economy, this was a time to be focused on problems at home rather than abroad. More than a dozen Democratic and Republican and independent voters in conversations in and around Hacienda Heights, the community of 55,000 people around 20 miles east of downtown L.A., where first and second generation immigrants fill these subdivisions and strip malls. Afghanistan could be ignored, they said, but the possibility of their too young to be vaccinated children getting sick could not. Leaders in Washington might worry about the threat of terrorism or America standing with allies, but voters in Hacienda Heights said they are far more concerned about issues affecting them directly, COVID-19, homelessness, and climate change, to name a few. They also seemed hesitant to hold Biden accountable for the last week's attacks, at least for now. When you have no choice, you still have to pick one, said Patrick Huang, a 65-year-old independent who has voted for no good choice, sorry. You still have to pick one, Patrick Huang said. Who's a independent voter who's voted for both parties. They had plenty of time to prepare, to get out, and they totally messed it up. But I don't blame Biden for everything. This came after many presidents made mistakes. And, this is a guy who's 65-year-old voter, living his own life, independent, not a left-winger guy like me. And he's literally saying the exact same thing I am. And so is the lady before. Reading this article, very, very validating after seeing weeks and weeks of just ridiculous media propaganda. So this is California's 39th district. It was reliably Republican, encompassing the intersection of suburban LA, Orange, and Riverside counties. It's perhaps best known as the birthplace of Dick Nixon, Tricky Dick. Today, the district is around evenly divided between Asian American, Latino, and white voters. It is among the most competitive in the country, although Biden won easily. A Republican captured the House seat from a Democratic incumbent in 2020. I believe there was like Gil Cisneros or something like that. Richard Young and Emily Chen, who both voted for Biden last fall, remember the unity that came after the September 11th attacks. Again, unity to, again, all hate brown people. Like, that's literally what it was when they were teenagers. By the time they're in their mid-20s, they said they began to question why the United States remained in Afghanistan. She spoke the human toll in Afghanistan, but quickly added, "There's nothing we can do. My priorities are more domestic, health and climate. What is that going to look like?" Completely fair question. Like, this is something that, I'm sure these people, they don't like, oh, frick the Afghan people. We don't care about them. No, like, it's just like your life is swirling around you. You're trying to put food on the table for your kids. I mean, there's only so much you can focus about. Even some Republicans who voted for Trump on the fall were reluctant to criticize Biden. And these are probably more, moderate Trump supporters, not hardcore people who, Tucker Carlson types, who, by the way, is going very hard on Biden right now, the populist, anti-interventionist, ship of fools guy, which is funny. So they may be excited more quickly than they should have been. They may be exited more quickly, than they should have been. But I think they were right to leave, says Andrew Chang, as he shopped with his wife Tanya Chang in downtown Fullerton. It was multiple presidents' missteps, and we couldn't have stayed there forever. Chang said she had largely paid attention to what was happening with Afghan women through forums on Reddit. Hearing what they go through is horrible. There's no way around that, she said. But she said her vote was highly unlikely to be swayed over international issues. I'm much more concerned about what's happening here. She said taxes remain the most important issue for her. Kind of more makes sense, more Trumpian way of putting it. Even Representative Young Kim, a Republican who flipped the seat last year, was less critical of the president than many lawmakers in her party, which is interesting. We don't have the luxury to be sad about what's happening, but we have to be resolute, gather information, and get people to safety. Kim said in an interview, "This is not a time to point fingers when people are desperate and people are dying." So, wow, some maturity there from young Kim. And it really shows you, like, the question is this a real sea change? Like, will we see major, policy shifts and political shifts after this, after we see the departure of troops in Afghanistan, things subside a little bit, and, what are Biden's political fortunes in this? That will be a big, big question to answer in the future.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh.
It's news flash.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our next and last story. So earlier this month, a California Superior Judge ruled that the state's Proposition 22 ballot initiative is unconstitutional. We didn't even cover that. Oh my God, my apologies. But we can just talk about that quickly. Prop 22 pretty much is the landmark anti-labor law written by so-called gig companies, which carves out a separate set of standards for people who work for app-based entities like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. The company spent some $200 million, incredible, unprecedented amount of spending for a ballot initiative like that to propagandize for the California state ballot measure. All that campaigning paid off, and the voters approved the measure. In doing so, they safeguarded these companies' avoidance of cost and liabilities that come with being an employer. Minimum wage, overtime laws, workers' compensation, health insurance provisions, sick leave, workplace discrimination protections, all that stuff out the window because of Prop 22. And, these people aren't really quite employees. Despite the recent court ruling, Prop 22 remains on the books. The ruling almost certainly will be appealed to the California Supreme Court, and the matter likely won't be resolved for another year. In the meantime, these companies are busy spreading Prop 22 clones to other states. You're not going to defeat these guys that easily. One of the strategies gig companies use to sow confusion among voters and drivers without benefits workers would receive in exchange for handing over their rights. Prop 22's backers said drivers will be paid at least 120% of local minimums while actively driving. That actively driving is key, given how much of a driver's shift time consists of, in-between rides or tasks. The pay is far lower than that. UC Berkeley study estimates that the average wage under Prop 22 was as low as $5.64 an hour. Effective average wage. Really bad stuff. Another promise that drivers would receive a healthcare stipend. The fine print on this one is extensive. Workers will spend at least 25 engaged hours per week driving, excluding the time between rides, which is tough, and be the primary policyholder of a plan to access the full stipend. And that stipend is nowhere near the overall cost of health insurance. Uber offers a maximum of $400 a month, much less than the average premium for a family. So, again, if you're like a wife or you get some kind of bad family situation, or maybe your husband, you're not the primary policyholder on your insurance plan, you can access the stipend as well, which is a big, logistical problem probably for a lot of people. So they did a study about this specifically with healthcare stipends. And the study finds that many drivers aren't getting the promised healthcare stipends even when they're entitled to them. 10% of the surveyed drivers are receiving the stipend. 40% say they never heard about their ability to qualify for stipends or weren't sure they had received the notification. Latino drivers are particularly unlikely to be aware of the stipend. Half of those surveyed either don't recall receiving a notification or aren't sure. The report finds that 16% of respondents, 16 that is, are going without health insurance, which is double the national uninsurance rate. And one driver told the report's authors that while he lacks insurance, he has gone to a hospital emergency room twice in the past year to receive medical care. So probably not a cheap expedition there. On the 29% of respondents rely on Medi-Cal, the public health care option, primarily reserved for people below 138% of the poverty line. Below 138% of the poverty line there. That is, I thought I'd get free insurance, one driver told the authors in explaining why he did not vote for Prop 22. Although he did not vote for it, he supported it. He relies on Medi-Cal to cover expenses such as when his son had a medical emergency. I'm worried about me. I'm almost 50, and I don't know what's going to happen if I just keep driving for Uber and Lyft. Another driver who does not log enough hours to receive the health care plan told the authors that because he lives in Tecate, near the Mexican border, he crosses into Mexico to receive health care. Probably a better way to do that, probably a lot cheaper. These findings are congruent with a previous study conducted by Tolchin Research and commissioned by the SEIU, showing that drivers are receiving little information about benefits, with many drivers entirely unaware of their benefits at all. Prop 22 may be struck down. Its authors have gotten too greedy in pushing a bill designed to prop up the gig economy model of employment, but for now, thousands of people are still working under its regime, locked out of the basic standards that are their right. This new study adds evidence to what workers who oppose the ballot measure have argued all along. Prop 22 was all about saving employers money and liability. Any legislation penned by gig economy executives and their ilk will always be. It's going to be tough to compete against $200 million, but the left really has to try, because Prop 22 is just really the foundation for the future hell that is going to be, or very possibly could be, hopefully is not, the American economy in years to come. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, it is, if you don't know, it's the start of the new school year. Tuesday, August 31st is the day I'm recording and releasing this episode. Tomorrow, I will be starting college, my first year in university. Very, very exciting stuff. I will be looking to get on the university radio station and all that stuff, but the question is, what will happen with my beloved project for the past nearly 5 years, Spencer Walsh Radio Network? It's been an absolute honor and privilege to do this, and I'm so proud of maybe not every, but most of the episodes I've done here on this website. Thank you. If you ever, at any point, listen to a minute of me just blabbing on about whatever in my weird, awkward, nasally way, Really do appreciate it. I don't know, honestly, what's going to happen with the Spencer Wars Radio Network. It all depends, on what college is like once I actually get there. But stay tuned. I know you'll eventually keep back and keep listening. It's been an absolute pleasure these past nearly 5 years to be talking about politics, news, sports, music, whatever the case may be. And I hope to do it more. Until then, it's been a pleasure. This has been the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.